The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
This week on In the Loop, the president brought it home. Thousands packed into Chicago's McCormick Place to hear Barack Obama's emotional farewell speech, addressing diversity, citizenship, and thanking Americans for their commitment to the country over the past 8 years.
You were the change. You answered people's hopes, and because of you, by almost every measure, America is a better, stronger place than it was when we started.
Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan wins a record 17th term in office. Lawmakers return to Springfield with a new General Assembly sworn in. So will there be any movement in the 18-month-old budget impasse? Good evening, everyone. I'm Lauren Cohn. After a staggering surge in violence and murders in 2016, the Chicago Police Department launched an aggressive campaign to hire 1,000 more police officers and diversify its workforce over the next 2 years. Police leaders hope bringing more African American and Latino officers to the force will improve both trust and safety in those minority communities most affected by the violence. Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson shares his thoughts on the plan later in the program. But first, the promise of more officers is driving both hope and skepticism. Is the city's sweeping plan to hire more cops realistic? Here's my colleague, Chris Bury.
37-year-old Dennis Hecker grew up in Englewood, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods on Chicago's South Side.
Being an inner-city kid and, growing up in Englewood, you see a lot of things that you would like to change.
That desire to change Englewood and other violent neighborhoods motivated Hecker to leave his 15-year career in telecommunications to join the Chicago Police Department. He's among hundreds of recruits training at the police academy. Hecker's hope is to help make the city safer and police officers more trusted for children like his own.
I have 2 kids. To make sure that the city was safe for them. As you know, it's a lot of conflict between law enforcement and the community. Just to try and bridge the gap in between that, the best way to make a difference is to be part of the difference.
Hecker is among the 1,000 new officers the Chicago Police Department plans to hire during the next 2 years. In addition to getting more police on the streets, the city is looking to attract more minority candidates such as Hecker to diversify its police force. According to a Police Accountability Task Force report, in 2014, the Chicago Police Department was 52% white, 23% black, and 22% Hispanic. To close the racial gap, last fall the city announced its Be the Change campaign. It brings more recruiting events like this one at Kennedy King College on the South Side to primarily African American and Latino communities.
Our diversity as a city is a strength, and having a diverse workforce of a police department is a strength.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
Mayor Emanuel launched the aggressive recruitment efforts last year after 762 people were killed and 4,300 shot, the most violent year since the 1990s. The city hopes hiring more minority officers will help improve relationships in communities where trust of the CPD is low. Kevin Brooks, pastor of Greater St. John African Methodist Church in Englewood, supports the city's initiative.
This campaign will be successful because it engages Black and brown men and women to take ownership back into their community. It gives them an opportunity to police their own families, their own neighborhoods, because they know the ills of the community and they know the challenges of the community.
One key goal is that Chicago police better reflect the racial makeup of the neighborhoods they patrol. Last April, Emanuel's Police Accountability Task Force released a scathing report claiming that the police department had little regard for the lives of minorities. That finding, along with the Justice Department investigation, have increased the pressure to diversify. But some city officials have questioned whether adding 1,000 officers in 2 years will be feasible. Applicants have to go through rigorous written, physical, and psychological exams, as well as 6 months of academy and field training, and only 1 in 100 successfully completes the process. Bill Ruthhart, City Hall reporter for the Chicago Tribune, says some aldermen consider Mayor Emanuel's plan too ambitious.
Some aldermen are wary of whether this is actually going to get done. The Emanuel administration's had difficulty keeping up with attrition throughout the 5 years he's been in office. We did an investigation a few months ago that found that the department's down some 600 officers since Emanuel took office, which is about a 5% drop. If you count the last few months of Mayor Richard Daley's administration, we're down 1,000 officers since 2011. So even if you add this 1,000, you're really just about back to where we were 5 years ago.
We sat down with Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson in his office to hear his thoughts on the recruitment drive. In a city with more than 700 murders last year, more than 4,000 people getting shot, how do you attract qualified candidates to become police officers?
Well, you know what? I think that most people look at the profession of law enforcement, and one thing that I want them to know, there's probably not a more noble profession that you can choose. And the rewards when you see the positive effects you have on people's lives is enough right there to want to join.
Do you still get enthusiastic candidates in spite of all the problems going on in Chicago?
Absolutely. You know, people want to be a part of change. People want to see our city safer. They want it to be the best big city in the country. So they are eager to join up to get us to that point.
Alderman Ed Burke has proposed that the police department allow recruits who have minor criminal violations, maybe minor drug offenses. Is that a good idea, and will it increase the pool of applicants for you?
Well, it would probably increase the pool. I mean, I think that's pretty cut and dry. But, you know, we'll look at it, take a look at it, because we have to be careful about who we relax the rules for. But I do believe there is some value in it. If a kid makes a mistake when they're 16 or 17 years old, and now they're 25, 26, and they've matured, I think that we should take that into consideration.
You mentioned getting police officers who look more like the neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? How do you get police officers who are reflecting the racial and ethnic composition of Chicago?
I think just by going out into those communities and just expressing our desire to have them become applicants. A few entry exams ago, we thought we had the formula to attract diverse population, and we found out that we didn't. So we went back to the drawing board and we figured out what we did wrong. So the entry exam prior to this one, we had 71% minorities apply. So I think we continue down that road, just keep going out in those communities, trying to impress upon people. If you want to be part of change, this is the time to do it.
Obviously, the police department's reputation took a hit during the Laquan McDonald crisis. What are you doing with the new recruits at the academy at the very beginning to change the culture of the Chicago Police Department?
That's an excellent question. So one of the things that I'm very proud of is now when the recruits go through the training cycle, we partner them up with inner city high school kids and do what's called peace circles. And in that way, two things happen. The police officers can get to see those kids as people, and they discover that just because they live in a complex neighborhood that they're not all bad kids. The second part of that, though, is that it lets those kids see those officers as people, too. So it works both ways. So I think that doing things like that and expanding on that will go a long way to break down some of the culture biases.
In the political realm, we've just seen the president-elect of the United States, of course, in a tweet, suggest that if Chicago's violence isn't getting better, maybe the mayor should ask for federal help. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but is Chicago at the point where it needs to be waving its hand at Washington and saying, help us?
Well, I mean, I think that we can use federal help like funding for mental health treatment, funding for more jobs, funding to kind of support some of these impoverished neighborhoods. So if we can get that type of help, we'd be well receiving of it.
I think some people reading that tweet or hearing about it might imagine federal agents, you know, FBI, ATF, or whatever federal agents on the streets of Chicago.
Well, you know what? We already partner with FBI, DEA, ATF, and as a matter of fact, you'll see them out there sometimes partnered up with CPD officers. So that is already happening. Can we expand it? Sure we could.
You share something with your predecessor, Superintendent McCarthy, you both have called for getting repeat gun offenders longer sentences. Historically, in Chicago, there's been resistance to that from some African American leaders because they don't want to see more young black men in prison. What do you say to them? What is your argument to
Well,
them?
listen, I'm like this. If you pick up a gun, you pull that trigger and you shoot somebody, it shouldn't matter how you rap. If you decide to do that, then you should be held accountable. And if that means going to prison, then you should go to prison. We just cannot tolerate as a city people out here repeatedly coming out here shooting people and killing people. That's unacceptable. So if you're a leader in this city and you think that 700 homicides last year was okay, then you shouldn't be a leader in this city.
As we go into this new year after a pretty violent 2016, what assurances can you give Chicago that we're going to see a reduction in shootings and in murders?
So listen, it takes all of us to reduce this violence. The police, our legislators, our clergy, our elected officials, and the community play an important part in that. And I guarantee you, if we get the legislation that we're looking for and the community's involvement, and that goes with the public trust that they have in the police department, then we'll see a reduction in this violent crime out here.
Superintendent Eddie Johnson, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it.
The Chicago Police Department will hold another entrance exam in April. For more information, log on to our website at wycc.org and link to In the Loop. A few days ago, President Obama gave his farewell address right here in Chicago, the same city where it all started. The theme of his speech was the state of democracy.
My fellow Americans, it has been the honor of my life to serve you. I won't stop. In fact, I will be right there with you as a citizen for all my remaining days. But for now, whether you are young or whether you're young at heart, I do have one final ask of you as your president. The same thing I asked when you took a chance on me 8 years ago. I'm asking you to believe, not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours.
Joining us now to discuss the president's farewell address and other trending stories are Christine Svensson, attorney for Svensson Law Offices, Domity Pongo, reporter for WVON Radio, and Kathleen Murphy, director of communications for the Illinois Opportunity Project. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Christine, reaction to what the president said, because his theme of his speech was the state of democracy, and he talked about being a citizen, which is important because while he will be a citizen now, it seems to me that he may just be the hope for the Democratic Party to sort of reunite.
Well, he is. I mean, they really have no bench other than Barack Obama. If you look to the other de facto leaders, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, those are not Democratic leaders that Americans look up to and have sort of an inspirational aura about them. So yes, Barack Obama will take a much larger seat than George W. Bush did.
Domity, you were there for the speech. What was your reaction to what he said?
Yeah, you could feel the electricity being there. I think, you know, like you said, President Barack Obama is a star, and you could feel that hometown presence when he was there, the electricity in the room, happiness with seeing them. But the problem with the Democratic Party right now is they feel like a bit deflated after this Hillary Clinton loss, especially with a candidate as bombastic as President-elect Donald Trump. So what the president tried to do in his speech is re-energize the base, assure them that the dream of democracy and that the ideals that he ran on are still alive and well.
Kathleen, he went out with a very high approval rating, but what we saw in this election, some would say, was more of a vote against Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton than it was for Donald Trump.
Sure. I mean, we saw he lost the middle of the country. The Democrats lost the middle of the country. That wasn't even ideological, really. It was people not being able to make the numbers work. Labor force participation rates are way down under his presidency. And then people on top of that, with their wages stagnating or being unemployed, are looking at their Obamacare premiums skyrocketing. They were just looking for change, a lot of them. It wasn't even ideological disagreements. So I think, you know, his legacy, in part, is the election of Donald Trump.
But a lot of his legacy is really complex when you think about it, too, because a lot of those states that benefited most from the Affordable Care Act went for Donald Trump. So I don't know if the Democratic Party has done well enough align their messaging with some of the policies that may have benefited Trump voters.
Is that it gave people insurance, but it didn't give them access to better health care, and the cost of it was so high for these families, and then they're looking at this further increase. It was just unworkable, I think, for a lot of people.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of the things that he touted actually as a success, but he also touted his economic successes. Let's take a listen.
And the good news is that today the economy is growing again. Wages, incomes, home values, and retirement accounts are all rising again. Poverty is falling again. The wealthy are paying a fair share of taxes, even as the stock market shatters records. The unemployment rate is near a 10-year low. The uninsured rate has never, ever been lower.
Well, Christine, some might say that we're not feeling it. We're seeing stagnant wages. We're seeing a disparity in income in this country. Here, we've definitely seen problems fiscally, as we were recently rated by the Financial Times the worst fiscal city in Chicago. So how does that compare to what the president said?
Well, I think that's exactly right. The reality is, and the American people know this, that Barack Obama has failed the American people because they are worse off than they were 8 years ago with respect to wages, housing, employment, you name the issue, safety. What has he done for the downtrodden that he promised to pull up by their bootstraps? And then the middle class, that population has shrunk. Before he was elected, there were 61% of Americans that consider themselves to be middle class. Now that figure is more like 50%.
One of the things, though, that he has brought to Chicago and to Illinois is money, and the fact that he has the ability to give us grants. We have many projects, thanks to the president. We just got a huge donation for the CTA. With him leaving Domity and the fact that Illinois went to Clinton, is this going to change the game for us in getting the money we really need at this time in Chicago and Illinois?
Well, I just want to take a step back as well. You know, President Obama did a lot to bring this country out of the greatest recession we've seen since the Great Depression. So I don't want to discount elements of his legacy and policies that helped to get us closer to a sound financial footing. As far as federal grants coming to the city of Chicago at that level, I think with the incoming administration, I'm somewhat optimistic with conversations going on between Rahm Emanuel and Donald Trump, and as well as Governor Bruce Rauner. I think it's going to take a lot in terms of federal funding. Right now, President Obama, upwards of $2 billion he's given to the city of Chicago. A lot of that went towards transportation. But as Superintendent Johnson said in Chris Bury's piece earlier, a lot of that could go towards some of these social services that we see suffering right now as a result of this budget impasse. And I think that could even alleviate some of this violence issue that we're seeing.
But how much is this political posturing? Mayor Emanuel comes out and says this is a sanctuary city, but gets invited to the White House to talk about the transition team. Governor Rauner won't say his name publicly, won't go to the inauguration, but did place a phone call. Right. So how much will the governor and the mayor's political posturing help us with President-elect Trump, Kathleen?
You know, I don't know what the Trump administration is going to do, but I think that, you know, these federal grants to Chicago, when Chicago has not demonstrated that it can manage, this is the worst run city in the nation. We have, fiscally, we are junk bond credit rating. Our schools are junk bond credit rating. Schools are closing. It's hollowing out. Middle-class families are bleeding out. This city cannot manage itself. It has, Rahm Emanuel's done a abhorrent job of running this city. The Trump administration should not give it any more money in federal funding until it gets its spending priorities in line and make some major structural reforms to the way it runs its pension systems and you know, the school systems.
Well, thanks for bringing up Springfield and the pension system along with Chicago, because Speaker Madigan just rolled into his 17th term. We just swore in a new assembly, yet we're at a budget impasse, Christine, still.
Right, and you know what, it's a little bit of, we shouldn't exactly look to the fact that we don't have a budget as the major problem, because we have a de facto budget. It's just not signed by legislators. There are consent decrees and court orders that are, you know, calling for the revenue being spent around the state. And the real problem is that our spending is absolutely out of control and that it is not spent in the right places. 1/4 of our state spending goes towards the funding of pensions. We have a $130 billion unfunded pension liability. And until some politician or some elected official is able to address that particular issue, because that is the reason why people are suffering, why there are all these unfunded social services programs.
Well, now they're floating
really
once again in Springfield the idea of raising the income tax to just under 5%. We're hearing maybe a sweetened beverage tax in exchange for a property tax freeze. So are we, Madigan came out and he seemed a little bit conciliatory. Are we going to reach a meeting of the minds? Is it the governor's job as holding the highest office to make this happen?
Well, with the property tax freeze, we see that there's at least some effort toward compromise. I agree with Christine in that the money is not being spent in the right places. Of course, the state needs to spend revenue, but we need to raise revenue. But we need to look at what we're really spending money on. And I think if the first thing we slash social services, and in the same time that we have this budget impasse, we see violence skyrocket. I don't think these two are coincident. There's some correlation there. And attached to every social service is a face, there's a name. We even looked at, I always reference this article in Sometimes by Mary Mitchell, talking about all of the things systemically that failed Laquan McDonald far before he was killed. There are so many, he was a part of the system. Every social service that could have kept him out of a position where he was allegedly under the influence of a drug and wandering in the middle of the street, those types of things start off with some government assistance or at least with some engagement on a social grassroots level. And if those things are being defunded, it's no surprise that we see happening in the streets.
But those things were never really funded. I mean, from 2000 to 2015, the state's revenue increased by 59%. But if you look at the way they spent the money, higher education dropped 8% minus pensions. Health and Human Services only went up about 10%. Meanwhile, state employee benefits went up 166%. State employee pensions go up 586%. We're spending our money on pensions that we can't seem to reform. I mean, the governor is right to insist on major reforms with any budget, because if we pass a budget without making spending reforms, we're just solidifying these warped spending priorities.
Many people think the bottom's going to fall out, and that's why so many people are migrating. What about the governor putting $50 million into his campaign 2 years out? Christine, what does that say?
Well, it says that he's very serious about his reelection efforts, and he needs to be, because that is the battle of the century as far as I'm concerned. Our state is done if Bruce Rauner does not win in 2018, because what flows from that is, of course, the ability to draw the map, after the census in 2020. And if the Democrats own both the legislature and the governor's mansion, they will forever put us all out to pasture. They will raise our taxes as much as they can for as long as they can, just like they've done historically. It will continue forever and ever.
But what are his chances if he can't get both sides to agree when he holds the highest office?
And if he does win, does that mean we see 4 more years of this budget stalemate? I don't know I don't know what needs to happen depending on how voters, who voters feels responsible. But if Madigan and Rauner can't come to some sort of agreement, I don't know if we're going to see any movement at the state level.
One example was the mayor was just able to negotiate with the laborers. 2 unions, both the House and the Senate, passed this, where they would contribute more to their retirement fund, up 3% to 11.5%. But the governor is going to veto that. So it turned into the mayor's office calling him a governor gridlock, and the governor's office firing back saying Madigan's mayor. That doesn't help anybody, Kathleen.
No, it doesn't. And I don't know how they're going to come to an agreement on this. I think Rauner has got to stand his ground, because he is right that if we don't, we're going to get de facto reform in the form of some kind of bankruptcy. Maybe, a state can't go bankrupt. Maybe the pension funds go bankrupt. I mean, in order to protect people's livelihoods, we have to have some kind of reform at some point. In order to protect, our school systems, we're going to have some kind of major reforms. It's either going to happen through courts or it's going to have to happen through the legislature.
But I will say this, I fear that we're getting closer to a plutocracy. It seems more and more the country, whether you're talking about at the federal level or at the state level, the more money you have, the more likelihood it is. It's always been like that, right? But when you have $50 million, I mean, even for his campaign before that, he spent $28 million on his own campaign. And if the governorship goes to whoever has the largest bank account, is this really a democracy?
Yeah, and I just want to make one point about this gridlock, though. We could have had a budget. All last session, Mike Madigan had veto-proof supermajorities in both the House and the Senate. He could have had any budget he wanted. He didn't need the governor. He didn't want one because it is more politically advantageous for him to have gridlock with the governor. It is more politically advantageous for Rahm Emanuel to have gridlock with the governor than it is for Rauner. Rauner is the one who's vulnerable.
Well, I wish we had more time. I wish we had more time because the debate is going to continue. We know that for sure. Thank you so much to our guests, Christine Svensson, Dometi Pongo, and Kathleen Murphy.
Thank you.
And that wraps up tonight's show, and you are now in the loop. And to hear more from our earlier interview with Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson, log on to WICC.org and connect to In the Loop. And before you conclude tonight's show, we want to leave you tonight with some final words from the people who attended President Obama's farewell speech in order to show their appreciation. We begin with the president himself and his emotional tribute to his wife, Michelle.
Michelle LaVaughn Robinson, girl of the South Side. For the past 25 years, you have not only been my wife and mother of my children, you have been my best friend. You took on a role you didn't ask for, and you made it your own, with grace and with grit and with style and good humor.
I'm shocked that I'm here. I'm really happy to be a part of such a historical event. I've been a fan, not just a constituent, but a fan of President Obama and what he's done for our country.
This conversation about diversity, regardless of whether we're black, white, Asian, gay, straight, that we all come together for a common goal, something bigger, greater than us, bringing us all together to be inclusive. Diversity is the mix, inclusion making that mix work. Whatever that mix may be, it makes a difference in what we're going to do for the next generation.
It's our country and it's our responsibility to now take everything that Obama has done into our hands and continue his legacy, even though he can't do it from the president's office. As Obama was saying earlier, one of the most important offices you can have in the political system is a citizen. And so I have never been prouder to be a citizen in the United States than I have been today.
After this last election, I was starting to lose a little bit of my faith. To have him reinvigorate that and remind us that this is not about individual elected officials or about individual elections, but about us, reinvigorated me.
It's a little bittersweet. He still has the ability to make us hopeful about the future, but I feel like the road is a little more rockier than it was the last time we came together like this.
I left 8 years ago. We lost 800,000 jobs that month. Now there's a net gain of jobs every month for 7.5 years. 20 million more Americans have health insurance. All the industries bounced back. We brought home a lot of pluses tonight.
It's like surreal being here because it's like 8 years later and I've graduated college. I'm a citizen now. And like, he's just so inspiring. I just, God, sorry. But yeah, I really love Obama.